There are so many approaches that are amazing for fat loss, maybe long term because they're not sustainable, but you will lose weight. That doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be metabolically healthier.
Right.
No, you can be destroying your LDL cholesterol and your insulin resistance, and yet still maybe less so insulin resistance, but losing weight. So if you're on a weight loss journey or fat loss journey, make sure you have your actual health in mind.
Welcome to Cut the Crap with Beth and Matt, the world's #1 no bullshit health and fitness podcast.
Are you ready to cut the crap with your diet and exercise, get strong as fuck, and build a healthy relationship with food? Then you've come to the right place.
Show your support for the podcast by joining our Patreon community, where you get exclusive content which consists of monthly workouts you can do at home or at the gym, monthly challenges that are either strength, habit, or mindset based, and access to hundreds of lower calorie, higher protein, family-friendly recipes.
And now all Patreon members receive exclusive access to a private Facebook group. Now let's cut the crap.
There she is.
How are you?
Good. How are you doing?
Hi.
Hey.
Thanks for coming. We're glad to have you.
Super glad.
For inviting me. Really
excited
with you.
We're excited to talk about something we actually haven't really discussed on this podcast yet.
Barbie, you are a cognitive registered dietitian. Is that kind of what you special in? Is that correct?
Well, I'm a registered dietitian who specializes in brain health. So, and metabolic health, because they go hand in hand, right? Your brain cannot be healthy if you're in poor metabolic health. So I really talk about it all.
Amazing.
Yeah, that's awesome. So how did you get started in working with people with metabolic health, cognitive brain function, and things like that? How did you get interested in that?
Yeah. So I've been a dietitian for almost 25 years, and I was always struck by, when I was in school, the lack of differentiation between men and women. With the exception of pregnancy, lactation, there were very few differences in terms of recommendations. And I just always felt like that was something that was lacking. So I wanted to really specialize in women. So I have the whole time. I also see men. I don't see teenagers anymore. So that just kind of evolved as I evolved, as my research evolved, as I got older. As when I turned 40, I started to notice that there were differences that I, thought could be addressed through nutrition and lifestyle. And so I started to focus more on that with some success with my clients and myself. And then it just sort of evolved into perimenopause, menopause, and I have to say, if I didn't do this for a living, I would have no idea that with perimenopause, we are at an increased risk of high blood pressure, elevated LDL cholesterol, insulin resistance, and intra-abdominal fat storage. I wouldn't know that because it's not, unless I was really following people on social media or whatever, I really wouldn't know that. And so when I realized that, I thought, oh, wow, this is something that needs to be addressed before it becomes super problematic in someone's later 50s, 60s, 70s. And then recognizing the connection between that and brain health, that's how it all kind of transpired, because the brain has always really interested me. And of course, now with my mother's diagnosis of Alzheimer's, it's become much more personal.
Yeah, I bet. How old is your mom right now when she got diagnosed?
She's 77 now. She was diagnosed officially last summer, but I believe that if I could have gotten her properly evaluated in 2019, she would have been diagnosed then.
Yeah. It's interesting. Both my father-in-law and my mother-in-law, who actually my mother-in-law passed away, had Alzheimer's. And now my father-in-law has Alzheimer's, which is absolutely crazy. But crazier thing is that my husband's mother, that's her husband. And then his dad, it was his wife. So now the two that are divorced for a very long time both have significant others that had Alzheimer's, which is really crazy. And with Gregory, my father-in-law, my mother-in-law kind of knew it was happening before anybody else. Mm-hmm. She's like, he's just different. There's just something I can't pinpoint, but, you don't want to put a label on it yet. And, waited a little bit too long and then got him assessed and, he was, had Alzheimer's. So yeah, it's an interesting thing.
It really is. And, my father died with dementia. It's not what killed him, but he had definitely had dementia when he passed. And so you've got it kind of all around you. And I really do too, both of my parents. So, it's really a concern. And it's something I really want to try to get women in particular, but of course men too, thinking about in their 40s, because this is when we're laying the groundwork. Usually, especially early 40s, we're still feeling pretty good about things. And so we're not really thinking about our later 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, but this is when we can be making such a difference. And so that's what I really hope to impart, through my Instagram or whatever, or through my corporate work, when I give big talks to lots of people. That's what I'm trying to convey. Let's do this. It's never too late to affect change and live better, but let's do what we can as early as we can because it matters.
Be more proactive.
Yeah.
Rather than reactive.
I just read your mind, Beth.
Yes, I was going to say proactive rather than reactive.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, that's the best way when we can, right?
Yeah.
For sure.
So with perimenopause and menopause, I know for me, because I'm 50, the brain doesn't work like it used to. So how do you tell the difference if you feel like, I know sometimes I'm like, am I getting Alzheimer's? Is this like early stages? I'll see somebody that I clearly know in the grocery store and I'm like, I can't remember their name. Right. I can't remember their name. I'm like, oh my gosh, does this mean something? So how do you go about, I don't even know how to ask that question, but
I think I know what you mean. How do you know if it's something to be versus just perimenopause or this stage of life?
Right.
Yeah, which is a question a lot of women have. First and foremost, it is rare for Alzheimer's to be diagnosed before the age of 65.
Okay.
It's more something that starts to really, the changes are occurring earlier, but for the symptoms to really manifest, it's usually more, early 60s, mid 60s. It's not that it can't happen earlier. It does. But when we are in our 45 to 55, it would be highly unusual if it was truly, mild cognitive impairment, even, let alone dementia or Alzheimer's type. What is happening during perimenopause is, there are tons of estrogen receptors all throughout the body, does a lot of things, but in the brain in particular. And so it's going to affect basically every region of the brain, this erraticism that we experience in perimenopause, and then ultimately the leveling off and decline with menopause. So we can feel all kinds of cognitive weird changes. I have a habit of leaving the kitchen sink on and walking away for an hour, those kinds of things, leaving our keys weird places, definitely forgetting names that we really should know. As long as it's coming back to you at some point, even later in the day. Do you know what I mean? Like, you don't remember it in the store, but a few hours later, you're like, oh yeah, that is probably just these changes that happen in perimenopause. What I would say, also make sure your sleep is good quality, because that really starts to affect us. It always affects us, but even more now. And it can be very poor quality because of these weird hormonal changes. Make sure you're exercising, stimulating, that blood flow, nutrient and oxygen delivery. Make sure you're engaging in cognitive activities that you actually enjoy, not just work, so you're constantly stimulating your brain. I would say particularly if other people are noticing, there's a difference for you or with you. That is when I think you do want to take more seriously just hopping into your doctor's office. There's a quick cognitive 5-minute test that they can do just to see. It's by no means thorough, but it can be kind of a starting point to see if, okay, maybe we need further evaluation. And if you feel like you weren't heard in your doctor's office, and I know this can be complicated with insurance and so on, but self-advocate and say, no, really, I want you to take this seriously. Please don't just say it's because I'm in, perimenopause or I'm in my 40s or 50s. I want this to be evaluated.
Yeah.
So you're sure you're taken seriously, but usually it's if somebody else is noticing, or you're forgetting how to do things that you know how to do, like a recipe you've been doing for 20 years. All of a sudden you really cannot remember what you're doing. Those kinds of things, not just walking into a room and forgetting why you're there. That happens to all of us.
Yeah.
Really kind of constant and it's interfering with your ability to function. That's when you should go get an evaluation. And it's probably nothing, if you've had any medication changes, that can definitely be an issue, and have your thyroid evaluated because and B12.
Okay.
Have your B12 checked, full thyroid panel, not just TSH. So these would be things that you'd want to self-advocate for in the doctor's office if you're concerned.
Okay. Okay. Now, you said that it was also rare to be diagnosed before the age of 65 or so. Now, if I'm not mistaken, there's also a gene that you have that, when present, I guess, can increase the risk of like Alzheimer's. Is that correct?
Yeah, there are three genes that are what are called deterministic, meaning you are almost guaranteed to develop Alzheimer's if you have one of these three genes.
Okay.
That represents about 1 to 2%, I believe, of all Alzheimer's cases. That is rare. And you would probably know it because you would see it in other family members well before the age of 65. Okay. So this is like family members are getting diagnosed in their 40s and 50s.
Okay.
That is rare. Then there's the ApoE4 gene, which we all carry, ApoE. And then there are three alleles, 2, 3, and 4. So there are 6 potential combinations of these ApoE genes that relate to Alzheimer's. If you have one copy of ApoE4, that confers a 2 to 3 times increased risk. So not deterministic at all. It does not mean that you will end up with Alzheimer's. It just bumps up your risk a bit. If you have 2 copies, so you inherited one from each parent, that is an 8 to 12 times increased risk. So again, not guaranteed, but this would be someone who would want to pay extra special attention to their metabolic health, particularly their blood sugar and their cholesterol.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Amazing. I didn't know that. It's obviously highly, highly complex.
Yeah. But even if you get tested and you have 2 copies of ApoE4, do not take it as a sentence. Take it as, okay, so I have this. Listen, we all have something. There is a list of about 50 things that can contribute to dementia risk. And some people have 2 copies of ApoE4. They're at more risk than a lot of us, but there's still things you can do. You just want to be somebody who's paying extra special attention.
Okay.
That makes sense?
Yeah.
It does.
Now, you mentioned dementia. So what are the differences between actually dementia and Alzheimer's? So
Alzheimer's is a type of dementia. There are other types of dementia, vascular dementia, Lewy body dementia, another neurodegenerative disease, Parkinson's. They all sort of overlap a bit in terms of the beta amyloid plaques, the tau tangles. These are present in most forms of dementia. And the thing is, really, for most people, a diagnosis of Alzheimer's is sort of looked at MRI, neuropsychological testing, maybe blood work, maybe a PET scan if you want to spend the money and you really want to go down that route. But like my mother, for example, she had an MRI, which definitely showed, a brain that looked, you can't see the tau tangles or the beta amyloid plaques. You can see shrinkage. You can see much smaller hippocampus. You can see atrophy. And then she had neuropsychological testing, which is like a 3-hour long test where they evaluate your cognition in various domains that, absolutely showed there were deficiencies. So these 2 things together, her neurologist looked at and said, okay, you absolutely have dementia. I am very reasonably sure it's Alzheimer's type. Okay. Because there wasn't vascular dementia and it wasn't Lewy body dementia. So it's sort of, you don't know with 100% certainty without much further extensive testing. That's more invasive, more expensive, and kind of unnecessary. And besides, probably treat it the same,
Gotcha.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
If there's one thing we can all agree on, it's that life is hard. And with that comes a level of stress that can often be debilitating. Balancing your mental and physical health often seems like you need a PhD to achieve. And so often we are only able to focus on one or the other, which can lead to a less than enjoyable life. And that's why I loved Cured Nutrition's Serenity Gummies. From coaching calls to leadership meetings with my team, to tapping into my creativity for new content, to closing business deals, and even interviewing guests for this podcast, the Serenity Gummies have proven to be a valuable part of my self-care routine. I take them daily to help manage my stress and anxiety, and doing this allows me to perform at my absolute best, which helps me serve others to my absolute best. Formulated with their trinity of ingredients, a blend of full-spectrum cannabinoids, functional mushrooms, and adaptogens, Serenity Gummies are your answer to finding calm in the chaos that we call life. Right now, Cured is extending an exclusive offer to you, our listeners. You can grab a bag of Serenity Gummies for 20% off by visiting www.curednutrition.com/CTC and using coupon code CTC at checkout. That's CURED nutrition.com/CTC and coupon code CTC at checkout to save 20%. So what are you waiting for? Pop a gummy and protect your peace, and let's cut the crap together.
So what would someone in their, let's say, early 40s do can you actually prevent Alzheimer's?
Well, I hope so.
Right.
We can say with absolute certainty,
Yeah.
right? Because we don't really know what causes it. So, we know that we know what an Alzheimer's brain looks like at autopsy. There are common characteristics, but what actually causes that to develop in someone, we don't know. And it's probably multifactorial, and it's probably things that we haven't discovered yet. But there are certainly things you can do, anyone at any age can do to help decrease that risk. I would say top shelf, making sure your metabolic health is in good shape. And we are really not doing too well there. I mean, 1 in 3 people worldwide has metabolic syndrome. So 1 in 3 people worldwide has high blood pressure, dyslipidemia, so wonky cholesterol and triglycerides, excess intra-abdominal fat, and insulin resistance, if not prediabetes or diabetes. 3 out of those 4, 1 in 3 people worldwide has. So, and
alarming.
It's very alarming. And the statistics right now are that 88% of US adults have at least one.
88%.
Yeah. So that means that only 12% of US adults who are, walking around are genuinely in full, complete metabolic health.
Wow. Okay.
So that's where we start.
Yeah. Right.
What the fuck can we do then to promote good metabolic health?
Yeah. So obviously, first and foremost is being a good patient, seeing your doctor regularly and having these things evaluated, because that's the other thing about metabolic illness. It's silent. You don't know you have high blood pressure. You don't know you have dyslipidemia. You don't know you have insulin resistance until, diabetes has really progressed. So have these things evaluated at least annually. I personally think a woman over 50 should be having these things evaluated twice a year, because things can change pretty quickly with perimenopause and menopause. I think every woman over 50 should have a blood pressure cuff, and take it under different conditions, first thing in the morning, after exercise, when you're just chilling and relaxing, after you've had a stressful call or argument or meeting, after sex. Know what your blood pressure is doing in all different conditions. Not once a year at the doctor's office is not nearly enough to assess your blood pressure.
It's one fraction of time.
What'd you say?
No, sorry, that's just one little fraction of time.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a couple minutes in time. And, with all due respect to doctors and nurse practitioners and physician's assistants, blood pressure is not usually taken properly in because blood pressure is very clearly linked with dementia risk, especially vascular dementia risk. So make sure your blood pressure is in good shape. If you have high blood pressure, either do all the things you can, nutrition and lifestyle, to lower it, or please take the medication that's prescribed to you. We're so afraid of medication. I'm using the kind of universal we with statins and blood pressure medication. And if you need it, take it.
Yeah, you don't get an award for not taking medication.
Right.
No, you don't. And of course, people are afraid of the side effects. But, if you allow LDL cholesterol to go on for 20 years when you could have taken a statin and prevented its progression, the side effects of that are a heart attack or a stroke or death. So, not pushing medication. I'm just saying, please, if your doctor, if your specialist, if your team believes that this is appropriate for you, please listen, because I know a lot of people don't. So blood pressure, LDL cholesterol, take it seriously. We know for sure that LDL cholesterol is causative. It's not just linked to, associated with, it is causative in atherosclerotic heart disease. So again, I know a lot of people who, I've always had high LDL cholesterol. I don't want to take a medication for it, so I'm just going to kind of live with it. Okay, obviously it's up to you to do whatever you feel is right for you. I certainly would never push anything on anyone, but the exposure time, like we call it pack years with cigarettes, it's called LDL years with elevated LDL cholesterol. The longer you're exposed, the more damage is done. ApoB is a better indicator than LDL. So also get your ApoB tested. So blood pressure, cholesterol, and of course, insulin resistance. We got to take care of manage our blood sugar. And that usually you can go a long way with that by reducing intra-abdominal fat.
For sure.
So get moving.
Okay. Yes, exactly. Lifestyle factors.
Yeah.
I actually want to touch on the LDL cholesterol aspect there. Now, I don't know anything about this, but is there with the keto diet? I'm not saying this to take a shot at keto, but with keto, we often see people's LDL cholesterol skyrocket. So, is there any, I guess, causation there or correlation there between keto diet and increased risk of dementia or Alzheimer's?
Diet specifically, I don't know. What happens a lot, typical keto diet, and this is not true across the board, but the typical keto diet will contain a lot of saturated fat. And saturated fat is linked to an increase in LDL cholesterol. Now, that said, there is a very small percentage of people who can eat all the beef and all the cheese and all the butter and all the full fat dairy, and their LDL cholesterol does not budge. That's genetic.
Those are the ones yelling at us with a steak in their hand on social media. And you got it, primals, let's go.
Probably. But that is really not most of us. And, from a dietary perspective, our best guess is saturated fat having an influence. And that might be the reason, again, we can't say for certain,
speculation,
the reason that a ketogenic diet that's high in saturated fat may be linked. Also, you're not getting a whole lot of fiber, which really helps with LDL cholesterol typically.
Right? So damn important.
There are something I really want to make clear about diets just in general. There are so many approaches that are amazing for fat loss, maybe long-term because they're not sustainable, but you will lose weight. That doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be metabolically healthier.
Right.
You can be destroying your LDL cholesterol and your insulin resistance, and yet still maybe less so insulin resistance, but losing weight. So if you're on a weight loss journey or fat loss journey, make sure you have your actual health in mind.
Right. Which a lot of people do not. Thank you for that. Absolutely. A lot of people just do things in the name of weight loss, but they're not thinking of the long-term effects of what they're doing to get there.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. Obviously, we can see a lot of health benefits from losing weight or losing fat more specifically, but not all fat loss is healthy. Not all weight loss is healthy, especially when we talk about weight loss, because then you're looking at things other than just fat, right? We're looking at
fluid. Yeah. Making sure ideally what we're doing, if we need to, if it's appropriate for us, is losing fat and gaining muscle. That having a body composition, it's less about what the scale says, the net number, and more about more muscle, less fat. And, every doctor I talk to, and I talk to a lot, and I know a lot, I'm always just saying to them, please, please, please stop telling people to lose weight, and please come away with the directive to gain muscle.
Yes.
Because it makes such a big difference. And I think psychologically, I just know from talking to my own clients, when that's the perspective, I'm going to go gain muscle instead of I have to lose fat. There's something about that I think a lot of people will embrace a little bit more easily.
Yeah, I think so too. It's more positive.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
It's like, why don't you need to just build some muscle. You're under muscled. And, let's set you up with a personal trainer, get you in the gym rather than here you go. You should do this 1,200 calorie diet, which I've heard a lot of people tell their from clients that their doctors have told them, or go keto. And I'm like, where are they getting this information?
I know.
And it just makes them feel really bad about themselves.
Yeah. And of course it's unsustainable.
Yeah.
For sure. Always.
Yeah.
I feel like there's such a disconnect with the doctors and the nutrition aspect that there needs to be some kind of intervention there somehow.
And believe me, I'm doing what I can on my end. But the bottom line is, again, I have nothing but the utmost respect for Western medicine. It saves every single second of every single day. But doctors, by and large, are not trained in nutrition. That said, they are the front line for most people. Most people will never see a dietitian or a nutrition professional. Most people will only ever see their doctor, maybe even only their primary doctor for all of their health needs. So they sort of naturally assume, well, my doctor's going to know about fat loss, just keeping me healthy, but they don't. And this is why I really try to impart to providers, make sure you've got a handful of really good dietitians in your pocket, that specialize in diabetes, eating disorder, renal disease, cardiovascular disease, whatever, so that you can shoot your people out to them for the nutrition and probably the lifestyle aspect too.
Right. Rather than handing them a piece of paper, it's like, here, this is what you should. I've seen it before. I'm like, oh my gosh, that's your meal plan for,
Right.
What you were just diagnosed, especially like, say diabetes, things like that. People will leave the office with a diagnosis of diabetes and not knowing how to eat.
I see it all the time. One other thing I want to say, and again, it sounds like I'm doctor bashing, but I'm not. This is for the people who are listening.
Right.
I see this literally every week. Labs, because I look at labs, LDL is high, or triglycerides are very high, or there are signs of insulin resistance, and the doctor says nothing because it's so close to borderline or so close to normal. Instead of saying, hey, I'm sort of seeing this start to go in the wrong direction. You don't necessarily need medication yet. If you get with the program with nutrition and lifestyle, managing stress, sleeping better, et cetera. And if they can't handle, guiding on that, give them off to somebody else. But then I want people to know their numbers. That's my point. I want people to understand, what does high LDL look like? Because right now our guideline is 100 milligrams per deciliter. Most preventive cardiologists in particular, but even cardiology in general, is starting to say we should be more around 70. Because atherosclerotic heart disease is seen at 100 milligrams per deciliter. So that probably in the next 10 years is going to get lowered again. So know what high blood pressure looks like, know what elevated LDL looks like, know what high triglycerides look like, and know what the beginnings of insulin resistance look like, because all of it matters to your brain.
Right. So how does someone figure out what are those normal numbers?
Yeah, unfortunately, there isn't like one specific,
That's what I thought. Yeah.
Not that easy.
Oh, it can't be that easy.
Right. But that I'm aware of. Right. I mean, certainly you can, I think Harvard Health is a great website or resource for people who are not in the medical or nutrition field for giving quality information. If you just go to Harvard Health and type in LDL cholesterol profile, and it'll show you what it's supposed to look like. Blood pressure, it'll show you what it's supposed to look like. Pre-diabetes, you can read a little bit about it. These are quick, easy to digest little articles that I think can be really helpful to people. I would recommend Harvard Health for that. There are lots of others, but that's what I would say.
And then you could probably look at your medical records and look at your trends over time, which are all about the data.
Right.
That would be another.
But a lot of people will walk out of the doctor's office because they don't know what the numbers mean. And why should they? That's not their job. And it hasn't been pointed out to them. I had a client last week who's had LDL of 170 for 3 years. LDL, not total cholesterol. And it was never pointed out.
That's alarming.
Yeah. So, and same thing with like a 5.7 HbA1c, we're right there on the cusp of prediabetes. I like to actually see like 5.3, but not said anything. We need to know what these numbers mean so we can self-advocate.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I talk with people routinely at, coaching consultations where they're like, their wake-up calls that they are now formally pre-diabetic. Their glucose numbers are that high, and that's when they start making the changes, which not faulting them, we don't know what we don't know, but I think the message definitely needs to be spread more widely and from a top of the fucking roof or sooner the better, and take this more proactive approach. But also we're talking about labs and numbers and things like that. In terms of insulin resistance, are there some symptoms that you could start displaying rather than, looking at the lab work?
Not really. Okay. Because by the time you're super thirsty, peeing all the time, fatigued, maybe even vomiting, you're usually far more advanced. What I recommend is people tack on fasting insulin, not just fasting glucose and HbA1c, because fasting insulin will be elevated oftentimes before glucose is elevated or HbA1c is elevated, because your pancreas is pumping out insulin, working overtime to cover that glucose.
Okay.
So it might be doing a really good job. So if you're only looking at glucose or HbA1c, you don't know anything. But if you back it up and look at what your pancreas is doing with the insulin, and that's high, that's your first indicator. So that's what I recommend, that people ask to have that tacked on.
Okay, great.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever wanted to start a podcast? Spotify's got a platform that lets you make one super easily and then distribute it everywhere and even earn money doing what you love. All in one place for free. It's called Spotify for Podcasters, and here's how it works. Spotify for Podcasters lets you record and edit episodes right from your phone or computer, so no matter what your setup is like, you can start creating today. Then you can distribute your podcast to Spotify and everywhere else podcasts are heard. Now, what's really cool is video podcasts are also now available on Spotify. And if you want to be taken seriously on social media, you need to have a video presence. And what better way to do that by connecting with people via your video episodes? With Spotify for Podcasters, you can earn money in a variety of ways, including ads and podcast subscriptions. And best of all, it's all totally free with no catch whatsoever. And ever since we discovered Spotify for Podcasters here on Cut the Crap with Beth and Matt, we are easily releasing new episodes and distributing them to multiple platforms, and it's never been easier. We highly recommend you give it a try. You can download the Spotify for Podcasters app or go to www.spotify.com/podcasters to get started.
You talk about something about the mind diet. Can you explain a little bit what that is?
Yeah. So there are lots of different approaches that one can take to benefit their brain in terms of nutrition. But the MIND diet, Mediterranean-Intervention for Neurodegenerative Delay, is what MIND stands for. And it was a research study at Rush University, Chicago in 2015 that was published that outlined foods that, and with the frequency of these foods, that is particularly beneficial for brain health, specifically prevention of Alzheimer's. If you followed this diet, these foods with the frequency that they outline for 4+ years, you had a 53% decreased risk of Alzheimer's disease. Now, it's never just about nutrition alone, but this study was looking at these foods specifically. So it included olive oil, berries and leafy greens in particular, nuts,
Good stuff.
fatty fish, all the whole grains, all the things that we hear about over and over again that everybody just wants to think, I've heard that before.
Yeah.
But, it's funny. It reminds me, I do a lot of corporate work. So I speak to a lot of employees across the country, around the world, actually. And I was getting hired by a company in California. And something that they asked me in the meeting was, are you going to tell us anything that we don't know? And I thought, are all of your people metabolically healthy? Because they're not. They need to hear what they've already heard.
The basics. We need repetition for sure.
Yeah.
Exactly. Of course, we want to listen to the sexy because it lights up our dopamine. And it's so exciting to hear, how many of us are actually doing those things? We need to back and move our bodies, get some veggies and some protein, hydrate really well, go to bed, for God's sake, and manage our stress. Be really proactive about managing our stress. So, sleep is right up there with exercise in terms of importance to your brain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you mentioned some of those foods there, Barbie, and it's funny because some of those foods you mentioned, there's a lot of people on the internet telling you to avoid those foods specifically, right? I don't think anybody's telling you to avoid olive oil. I don't know. I have never heard that one, which is good. That's very, very good food. But then berries and leafy greens and oats. At one point or another, some jackass has told us that those foods are bullshit.
Right. Vegetables don't want to be eaten, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Vegetables don't want to be eaten.
Oxalates.
No.
I'm like, cows don't want to be eaten either. What the fuck?
That's an excellent point. So, I just don't even know what to say to that. It's absurd. We have so much research that indicates you don't have to be a vegan or even a vegetarian, but to just put more plants on your plate is absolutely associated with increased longevity, reduction of all of our metabolic disease and including cancer. So I don't even what to say. Obviously, they're talking about anti-nutrients and so on, but my goodness, please stop it. We need more plants on our plate.
Right.
Yes. My goodness is right.
Yeah.
Most Americans right now, a lot of those foods we just mentioned, they have a great source of fiber. And most Americans and probably worldwide, we're not eating enough fiber as adults.
Fiber is so important. To just probably about every system in the body, indirectly or obviously directly to our, gastrointestinal health, but indirectly in other ways. So yeah. Getting the fruits, the vegetables, the nuts, the seeds, the beans, the legumes, the whole grains, good stuff.
All good stuff.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's talk about brain health a little bit more here. So when we're talking about improving brain health or promoting good brain health, does that just kind of fall in line with trying to work towards good metabolic health then as well?
Yeah. Well, what I always say is if you figure out what is good for your brain. And we're talking about it, take care of your metabolic health, get good sleep, manage your stress, move your body. If you're focused on your brain, let's say instead of your ass or your abs, you are going to be taking care of everything. That's my personal belief.
I love that.
Yes.
Brain, not the ass. I can do that.
However you want to say it. We should make it
right.
I don't know.
Yeah, for sure.
But right, like that's what I always try to impart to my clients in particular. Like, let's focus on the health of your brain, because when we're doing that, we're taking care of everything. It is very likely that belly fat you don't like, whatever is happening, we're gonna largely start to manage that if what we're doing is taking care of this.
Yes, absolutely. I wish people listen.
Brain's not ass, guys.
And seriously, like, focus on your health, and everything else kind of will follow when you do that. Like getting your fiber, getting your movement, getting those veggies, getting those whole grains, those fatty fish. You will see body recomposition changes once you start to focus on your health.
Absolutely. And what I love so much about the Mediterranean approach, the MIND diet, it really is not about you need to get rid of. Of course, it mentions things that, like alcohol, like a lot of saturated fat, like trying to keep ultra processed foods to roughly less than 20% of your diet. Some people can, handle a little more, some people a little less, but it's so much less about exclusion and so much more about inclusion of these foods that we know to be particularly beneficial to our brain and our metabolic health.
I love that.
And maybe, hopefully, if you try to include all these foods, and you certainly don't have to do them all every day, but over the course of a week, if you try to nail all these foods, it might start to satisfy and crowd out some of the other stuff that may not be as good for your brain.
Yeah.
We haven't really talked about the Mediterranean diet too much on this podcast. And that's obviously, it's when, there's so much evidence and data to support, how healthy it is. So Mediterranean diet isn't necessarily, they got its name right from the Mediterranean region, if I'm not mistaken. It's not, they didn't just invent this way of eating. They just found that the people in this region were eating this type of way, and they had, for the most part, better health than the rest of the world. Is that right?
Yeah, essentially, in a nutshell. Certain aspects of it certainly have been criticized. I mean, for its time, it was a really good study. There are other, but since we've kind of looked more closely at different aspects of it, and yes, repeatedly demonstrates itself to be better for longevity, for optimal health than anything else that we're aware of. There will be people who will argue that vegan, being, strictly plant-based is more beneficial. I think we can go back and forth on that all day long, but, I don't have any interest in that. I think if you're a vegan and you're doing it well, do you? But certainly fatty fish is a great way to go. And then other sources of lean protein are as well. But yeah, it is. You can certainly, we can still overdo with Mediterranean,
anything in excess can,
right? But yes, in general, it is regarded as a really great place to start, and then fine tune it to you.
Perfect. Now, so that accounts for the way that they're eating and things like that. What about movement and things like that? Is there a specific, have they studied the movement of the people in that region as well and noticed any connection there?
Well, one thing that I think is so interesting that we definitely get wrong or miss or ignore in this country about the Mediterranean philosophy, and I don't love using the word diet, approach philosophy, because it's a negative connotation. I like to say approach or philosophy, is that they are active people. They walk to the market and back. They walk to work. They also chill out a lot more than we. So there's a difference in stress management and activity, not necessarily working out, which is great, and there are lots of benefits to zone 2 and HIIT and strength training, obviously, but in general, just being a more active person, that's something we don't do as much here.
They just walk more.
Exactly. Absolutely.
Public transport, there is, but trains and things like that, but for the most part, those cities are very walkable. They're very old. They've got the infrastructure,
very walkable, and it's not uncommon for businessmen to ride their bikes to work, as opposed to we just tend to be much more sedentary here. And I always say there's a reason that being sedentary, we usually only see it maybe secondary to smoking in terms of disease risk, because the human body is not just designed to enjoy exercise or benefit from it. We're designed to require it. We must move our bodies. It doesn't mean that we need to be crushing it at CrossFit, 3 times a week. It means we need to just be moving, walking up and down the stairs in our house, gardening, cleaning our own home, whatever, washing our own car, just being a person who moves.
Yeah.
We've definitely lost that in the last few decades. I always blame technology, like the washing machine and computers, and everything's automated now.
Remote controls. I mean, you could sit on your ass all day if you wanted.
Yeah.
And you could work, you could talk, communicate, you could get food. You might have to move within a 5-foot radius,
right,
like all day long, if that's what you chose. And I think it is how a lot of people live their lives. Just like, why not? But if we were just moving more, huge benefit.
Mm-hmm.
Totally. Now, this might be a loaded question, Barbie, but which, in your opinion, then, with those two things, nutrition and lifestyle in terms of movement, is there one that's more important than the other, or are they really just that important to be together? Like, if you could focus on one or the other starting out.
I always talk about what I call the 4 pillars of wellness when I talk or with a client, and it's nutrition, sleep, exercise, and managing your stress. And there are a lot of things underneath each of those, but the umbrella is the 4 pillars of optimal wellness, and then each of these 4 things. To be honest, even as a dietitian, I have to say, if everything's a hot mess and you've got to start somewhere, sleep is number 1. Because if you're not sleeping, you don't have the energy for the rest of it.
Right.
Okay.
Exercise is number 2. Move your body, because the truth is nutrition is nuanced, it's complex, and it's what is really going to be right for you long-term is going to be so specific and unique to you. Mm-hmm. I would say start with sleep and then move on to really nailing being a more active person and hopefully actually intentionally exercising several times a week, then move on to nutrition. And in their mix there, you got to be working on your stress, because if you are stressed out, it is going to get in the way of everything. Yeah. So actually, everything comes before the nutrition piece, in my opinion.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, I'm definitely not as much of an expert as you, but I would agree with that. If we can get people, just generally speaking, like with our clients, we just get them moving more, and not even purposeful exercise, right? Just increasing our NEAT. Huge benefit of doing that. And almost instantly they start feeling better.
Absolutely. Yeah. And can also, it can go either way, because exercise can also help you sleep better. So in general, if sleep is a real mess, like it is for a lot of perimenopausal and menopausal women, I would say do what you can to tweak that first, so that you've actually got the brain power, the energy, and the mojo to handle the rest of it. Okay.
I would like to talk about alcohol and brain health. Now, how does alcohol affect brain health and in general?
Right. So, alcohol is a neurotoxin. It's a hepatotoxin. We can't get around it. We now know, despite bunches of studies in the 90s about, a drink a day or something having, beneficial effect, particularly on heart health. We now know that that's incorrect, that there is no amount of alcohol that's beneficial for us at all. And certainly, as I said, it's a neurotoxin. So over time, now, can most healthy people who don't have any tweaky genes in this area get away with a drink a day? Probably. Canada's recommendation is 2 a week max. The American Cancer Society says no amount of alcohol, just in terms of cancer risk. I honestly believe it's one of the things, it's not necessarily easy, but it is one of the simplest, meaning uncomplicated things you can do to benefit both your metabolic health and your brain health, both directly in terms of decreasing toxicity in your body, and indirectly in terms of improving your sleep quality, having more energy, being in a better mood. Maybe your relationships will improve. I have lots of women who are interested in eliminating it for a period of time. And this is obviously anecdotal, but they feel so much better. Most of them just never even go back to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it's definitely, again, some people can get away with a little bit.
Yeah.
It's fine. Do you? But really, if you really want to take the health of your brain really seriously, it's not the best. It's not the best.
There we go.
And I know I'm a little biased, as a sober person, but it's just.
I didn't know that about you. That's awesome.
Yeah, I didn't either. I'm almost 8 years sober, so I can.
Good for you. Yeah.
Yeah. So I can relate. Yeah. That's why I talk about alcohol a lot. And it's something that it triggers a lot of people. I hate that word. It really does. They will fight to the death about different foods that they won't eat because it may cause cancer, but they will never talk about the fact that they love to have their 2-3 glasses of wine a day, and knowing that that actually causes cancer, but they don't want to look at that.
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, don't take away my, my joy, my relaxation time, and it is so ingrained in the lives of some people in terms of how they celebrate, how they socialize, how they unwind in the evening. I mean, it impacts a lot of different areas that are really important in someone's life, but like food does for a lot of people, some people play with food the same way they play with alcohol. I think we would really be doing ourselves a giant favor if we figured out, and it takes time, especially if that's your habit, but figuring out a way to do all of these things without substance, whether it's food or alcohol or weed or whatever you're doing, really just benefits you in terms of your physical. And I think I would dare to say emotional well-being as well.
Yeah.
Oh, totally. Totally.
I quit drinking in my early 40s, and it was like pouring gasoline on my perimenopause symptoms.
Oh, for
I just noticed that everything was just getting a million times worse. Mm-hmm. And women come to me struggling with menopause and they're drinking. I'm like, if you maybe just let go of that a little bit, you might notice some of your symptoms get a lot better, maybe even go away.
Absolutely. I mean, when I'm working with someone who isn't sleeping well and is really struggling or upset about, increased belly fat, but they're having 2 drinks a night. That is one of the, it's not, maybe not going to take care of all of it, but it's contributing, so you can maybe figure out a way to tweak that. We would be making some progress in these other areas.
Yeah.
That's the first thing I say when we do a Q&A or get messages on Instagram or something, people are like, what can I do about my belly fat? It's like, well, the first question I always ask, what's your alcohol intake like? Because we know that promotes storing belly fat.
And a lot of people miss that, and I know that, someone would say, well, you're sober, obviously you're biased.
I hate that.
I know, if anything, it makes me more clear about it. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
I mean, it just does. And I'm very evidence-based in what I do because I think I have a responsibility to be, and this is what the evidence shows.
Yeah. So, especially with sleep, which you're saying is pretty number one. Yeah. The alcohol affects your sleep, and that is a trickle effect to everything else.
Right. I mean, all these people are getting like ashwagandha and theanine and stuff, and it's like, just don't have the alcohol.
Right. They're like, well, alcohol helps me sleep. I'm like, you're passed out.
You're not sleeping. That's not quality sleep. Being passed out is not recovering.
Totally.
Oh, too, that's one thing too we hear a lot about with alcohol is that it helps them unwind and it helps them relax. And maybe so in that moment feel like it's helping, but we have to think about the next day, right?
Well, and that was when I really, made a commitment. I was somebody for whom it was a problem. And so I needed to take steps. But when because I started drinking heavily because I have panic disorder and I have an anxiety issue. Mm-hmm. When I finally started to make the connection that it was making my anxiety worse. And so it was this giant cycle. I was like, okay, this is like my first step. And so, that was really, I think that if more women in particular, women in perimenopause in particular, because anxiety can come out of nowhere for a lot of them, even if it's never been an issue, just because of all these brain, chemical changes in the brain. Alcohol is, like you said, Beth, throwing gasoline on fire. It really is.
Yeah. Our stories are pretty similar because I used alcohol to cover my anxiety and panic disorder and thinking it would help, but it actually would make it completely worse. And the next day I'm like, oh, I'm anxious again, not even correlating the alcohol with it. And then I'm like, I'm going to drink again. Then, you're calm for a little bit. Then you have the anxiety back, and it's a cycle that
anxiety
just needed to stop.
It is. Well, good for you, by the way. That is not a decision to make. I think hopefully the conversations are starting to happen more and
they
more.
are.
I think maybe 10 years from now, the landscape will be very different. And we'll be seeing alcohol more as something that, we're not using on a daily basis to calm ourselves down or however we're using it. I think we're going to make a lot of progress in that area over the next decade.
I think we're already seeing it. We
Yeah.
get messages all the time and comments and like, no, I didn't think I had a problem before. And I still don't think I had a problem, but you definitely made me look at my alcohol consumption. That's really all we're asking people to do is let's be honest about our alcohol consumption here. Me personally, I can kind of relate to what the two of you said. My wake up moment for me, and I'm not sober, I'm sober curious, I guess I would call it. But, last August, I went to Nashville when I got home after partying all weekend. I had the worst anxiety and depression for like a week straight. And I'm not normally an anxious or depressed person. And I was like, what the fuck? And so I challenged myself 30 days without, and I ended up going like 3 months without a drink. And like my life has gotten dramatically better since I really, really examined my alcohol, relationship. And now it's more so like I'm, once every couple of months, I'll have a drink or two, or unless I'm going out or something for a special occasion,
Right. And you are very likely not increasing your risk of anything with that consumption. I love Denzel Washington. He's my favorite actor. And he said something, I'm probably going to butcher it. He said, if you don't think you have a problem, or if you're curious if you have a problem, try putting it down for a month.
Yeah.
Just put it down. Yeah. How do you struggle at all? Do you struggle socializing? Do you struggle going to bed? Do you struggle unwinding? If there's any struggle, it's something to look at. Don't label yourself necessarily, and I'm certainly not labeling you, but it's a conversation to have with yourself.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah. That's what we usually do with clients too. If they're, seems to be affecting their fat loss, or they're, asking, what am I, should I quit? What should I do? Is this affecting everything? It's like, okay, well, give yourself like a 30-day challenge, even start with 14 days. If 30 days seems really overwhelming, and usually they'll start to feel better. They'll start to notice some changes.
That's how so many people get sober, right?
Yeah.
Just like dry January.
Yep.
Yeah. And that's the thing. Constantly making choices. We make like 80,000 choices a day. And so it is entirely up to you. No one should ever make you feel ashamed for whatever your choices are, even if it's not the best thing for your health. But take ownership of it. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, don't just let it be, oh, this is habit or compulsion or something that I'm, doing and I don't want to be doing it and it's ruining my life, but I don't know how to stop it. Take full ownership of everything you're doing. And if you choose to do anything that may not be in complete alignment with better health, that's okay. Do you. It's your life, but just take ownership of it. That's all.
Ownership.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Like that.
Own it.
Own it.
Yeah. Own
the
it.
Adults here.
Right. Exactly. Don't tell me not to drink my Diet Coke. If you're still drinking your wine, that's what drives me nuts. But bath aspartame's a poison. Okay.
Right. Or the organic wine, or like,
organic wine. Yeah.
Yes.
Healthy wine. Okay. Whatever.
Or gluten-free vodka.
Gluten-free
Just
vodka.
majoring in the minors.
Oh my goodness. I've heard it all.
Yeah.
I know.
All in the name of health. That's what we go out of our way, going back to alcohol, we go out of our way to find ways to still include alcohol into our life. Like, and if you're one of those people, like there's a good opportunity for you to kind of question that and examine that. Like, why is your healthy lifestyle, why is it so important for you to figure out how to include alcohol in your quote unquote healthy lifestyle? I get that question all the time. How can I include it? And it's like, well, include it you start by just being honest with yourself about your relationship with it.
Right. Yeah.
How can I include this wine, but I don't know how to get my fiber in?
Yeah, right. Exactly. We're focusing on the wrong shit.
It's all about choices. As long as you're aware and clear-headed.
That's it.
Do you? Absolutely.
You do you. Exactly. I love that. Thank you so much for being here. It was such a pleasure having you. I've learned a lot today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Got so many notes.
Yeah, I know. I'm going to have to listen to this again.
To be with you. It's so much fun.
Barbie,
I didn't drop an F-bomb. Look at me.
I mean, I think I probably covered it.
I don't even know if I had any today, which is surprising.
If you want to go ahead and give us a complimentary F-bomb, you can.
That's okay. It feels inappropriate now.
Barbie, if people wanted to reach out to you, where can they find you? Give us all the links.
Yeah. So I really only have two. I have my Instagram, which is the Cognition Dietitian.
Mm-hmm.
And my website is barbieboules.com. So you can reach out to me through there.
Amazing.
Perfect.
We'll have those in the show notes.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks
Thank
so
you.
much for being here. We appreciate you.
Yes. And I appreciate you too. I appreciate both of you, what you do, your work, and this podcast. And thank you just so much for having me.
It's been amazing to connect with you.
Yeah,
truly. Like you were kind of like, I think we connected maybe a couple months ago, I think. And
when I saw you, Alan Aragon, and I listened.
That's what it was.
I got, listening to your podcast. So yeah.
Yeah. And the menopause dietitian ladies, I believe we heard about you from them too.
That's true, actually. Yeah.
Yeah.
We're all in good company here. Thank you so much for being here today, Barbie. It was amazing. Thanks, you guys.
Bye.
Hope you enjoyed this episode, so why not share with a friend who needs to hear it? Send us a DM on Instagram or email us at cutthecrappod@gmail.com and join our Patreon at patreon.com/cutthecrappodcast. As always, we appreciate you and thanks for being here.